It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly, so let's realign. Just listen and feel your mind.
Hey guys, how's it going? And welcome to the MSD on 117.8. It's Tuesday, November 5th, right? It's already the start to November, right? That's so crazy to think about that it's not just that the year is almost past, but that, the things that are on the horizon, right? The things that we're looking forward to in the future, they're getting closer and closer. Right? I don't know if you guys feel that way or if that's how you choose to look at how time goes by. But, at each moment, history is growing, right? And there's like new things, new challenges that we're going through and new exciting prospects to look at. And so I hope that everyone's excited. If you're not in a place where you're excited, pray and ask to be excited, right? Because I think sometimes we may be in places in our life where things feel a little stagnant. And, I've definitely been there many times too, right? And that doesn't just have to be personal. It can be like with respect to your mission or role or whatever you're doing. Sometimes it feels like nothing is happening. Right, and I think many people have been there, right? But if we really pray about it and we take action, I really feel like the example of Warmyeongdong and of the Ambition Masterpiece being built, this is like the perfect example. And I'm really glad that the Trinity and Sonsangnim have been like really leaning into this, right? That Jesus used that as the example to teach Sonsangnim because it's so true. Right, like most good things in life that end up happening, it doesn't happen after just one time, like a first take at it, right? Or sometimes even two times or three times or four or five or six, right? And, if it's something minor, yeah, maybe you'll get it done, after like attempting it, a few times or so. But, if we're thinking about fulfilling God's will, right, the highest thing that even we want, right, with whatever it is, like whether it's your mission, whether it's evangelizing a life, whether it's, a new job, right, a new thing, right, you're doing within your department. Most of those things, like if we want to fulfill what God wants to do, we recognize that it takes work, right? And so I hope that no one feels stagnant where they are, because in reality, time is flowing and things are happening, right? And God, we know He takes action perfectly in accordance to time. And so, yes, in our hearts, sometimes we may feel frustrated, right? And I think that's a very normal thing to feel. But instead of allowing the frustration to stew and simmer and become like very reactive and explosive, we have to do the work that it requires, because when we actually do the work, we'll see our condition improve. And so with that, I have for Bible today, I have like two questions that I wanted to field and ask everyone and to see like where they are to kind of like get the ball rolling a lot, like the things that we can do all together as Providence, and right, like that even with the MSD on 17.8, that we can use this as a platform to really gain ideas and to test things too. And of course, I think there may be a bit of a fallacy too, and so I do want to field this for especially for AP members, but for all of these Western-speaking countries, right? Because I don't know the specific characteristics and the qualities of people in the other countries, but something that I've noticed with American Providence members at times is like, because, and this is stemming from the frustration thing, right? We want things to happen, and because we feel like it's not happening. Right, so we want it to happen. We're looking at something, we're looking at what is a potential problem, and we're like, how come this is like this, right? Or how come this thing isn't being fixed? Or like, how come this isn't being done, right? And I don't know if you feel that you've said that before, but I've definitely felt that, and I've heard it, many times, right? And so the thing that I want to point out about that is, sure, sometimes that's valid. But, if you were to look at it, look at someone else doing it, sometimes you yourself might feel like, I don't really feel like that's a completely valid criticism, right? And it's not that like the point that they're making is completely untrue, but it goes to show that reasonable minds can differ on what it is. And that means that there might be a better thing that God has planned, right? The issue that you're pointing out may in fact be there, But the way to go about it is not in accordance to our will. It's in accordance to what God wants, right? And so I'll give a classic example of this. This actually came up yesterday, so this is perfect for you guys to think about, right? Because amid all of this, there's a perfect solution. There's God's solution, but we do have to do the work to build it up, right? And in order to get there, right? So this is something for you guys to chew on too. And in fact, you guys can answer this as one of the questions for today too, right? Like, so currently we're working on a re-education or an education program for the SS because we've gotten some feedback, and also this is something that Sunseem has tasked us with quite a while back. And we're trying to do it in the most sensible way, right? And so I know some of the listeners here have recently reached out to me about teaching SS. And so, yeah, like we're really taking that into account and seeing what the best thing would be, right? So two things came up in the conversation about this, right? Yesterday, and so this is something that I'm posing as a question to you guys. For me, I'm not a huge fan of there being too many lecturers, right? Like that. Like as a newcomer is learning that there's like too many lecturers teaching one person. Sure, there's sometimes when you can have a special guest visitation or like someone who's an expert at teaching one thing, or if we just feel unequipped to teach that lesson that someone else may, right? That kind of stuff is fine. But then let's say the set program is that like over the 30 principles, like someone is going to teach 5, I'm going to teach the next 5, this person's going to teach another 5, right? And or like it's like every single week it's a different lecture. I'm personally not really a proponent of that, because I remember like growing up as a Milky Way and as an SS that there were localized programs to teach me in the past, and we had a wide array of different leaders at church, and so they wanted to do this, right, to have multiple people teach, and I just remember it feeling just so scattered, because that was kind of a point when I really wanted to know clearly, right? Like I was like, okay, I felt that until Milky Way, until SS, like no one really taught me very clearly, right? And it's not anyone's fault, right? And even that's a funny story, because like when I first came here from Korea, at first all I knew was Korean, right? I didn't really know English. So there was a person at the time who walked through all 30 principles with me and my younger brother. But we didn't really understand because we didn't know English, right? So I remember like they made this like poster board kind of thing, and they put a sticker for every single lesson, right? And so we filled up that entire thing. And thinking back on it, that was pretty cool. But I probably understood nothing, right, of the things that we did. And plus, that was so long ago, I can't really remember all the little details. And then the subsequent time that we learned, we had another program, and that was intended for like kind of SS. I was a little young at the time, but they included me, in that group too. But this time, it was taught in Korean. And, this was at a point where I had forgotten all my Korean and I only really knew English, right? So especially like the harder concepts and like the technical things, I did not understand too. So of course I can't fault people or anything like that. But then, this is the process of how what I was going through. And then finally, when it came to a time when I wanted to know, right? But I was like a little bit too shy. And, like, I think this is something to note. Like whether it's parents listening or people who are wanting to teach kids, specifically teaching kids the Bible studies, is sometimes the kids are too shy to ask things, right? They're thinking a bunch of things, but they're too shy to really engage with it. And you have to look at it from the child's perspective, because they really don't know anything, right? Because I didn't know anything, right? All we know are the things that we see. Right, so like for us, the older we get and the more responsibilities we adopt, we may have conversations with other members, and we may be planning different things, and we're like exposed to the different processes that get things done, like all the way from things like service, right? Even planning service, kids don't know how that works, right? The kids don't know how the tech works, what the preacher does, like all of those things. Like some kids probably don't even know where the message comes from, like all the basic things. You can't expect that the child knows that at face value, right? And so that's kind of where I was coming from. Like, I want to know, right? Because now I'm exposed to the world. I've been in school for like 5, 6, 7 years, and the world seems so different from in Providence, right? And also there's like problems like within, family and within church, like conflicts and stuff. And so I wanted to know clearly. But this is a time when like we had multiple lectures, and so I was I was very grateful that they were taking the time out to teach us, but it was so fragmented, right? Everyone's approach was different. Because everyone's busy, right? And like these were members who like had a bunch of missions, and they were incredibly busy doing a bunch of other things, and they were still taking the time out to lecture, both to train themselves and to teach us, and like to do this for the church, like all of those good reasons. But because of that, it was very fragmented, right? Like each person's lecture, I don't know if people really updated each other and like how that was, and where like if like people were aware of what was covered the previous lesson. So it was kind of like all over the place. And so I'm not a huge proponent of that, but I've heard like people say the complete opposite, right? That they actually like it when there's multiple lectures. And I'm sure that they're not thinking of it in the way that I articulated it, right? Like I'm sure there's like great ways to go about that, right? A very structured way and an efficient way to do so, right? And you can do all the planning and the work to ensure that you get the most out of that, right? So yeah, even that's the question, right? Like for you guys, like which do you prefer? Like what was your experience like learning or like relearning, or of like teaching another newcomer, right? Like whether you were the principal lecturer or like you were a manager or an evangelist, like I'm sure you've seen different things happen, right? Like whether it was one lecturer who taught everything and you're like sitting in, or like you had multiple, right? Like people help out to teach someone, right? So there's like different kinds of things. But tying it back to the first point, I hope that no one looks that as the cure all be all of like how to go about this thing, because the whole point is this was to show that reasonable minds can differ, and what may be the best in one circumstance may not be A or B, right? And in fact, it may be like somewhere in the middle, right? And it may be where God is trying to get us to, and what God would do in that situation. But having this conversation is useful, because otherwise you're just stewing and simmering on this on your own, right? And like you may be like getting resentful or like feeling like challenged and going through struggles and difficulties. And I hope no one is doing that, right? So if there are things that you care about, really pray about it, and let's try to work towards that thing. But always with the caveat, and I'm sure Providence people are good at this, always with the caveat that we know that our plan may not be the best. This is the thing that I wanted, especially American Providence members, to think about, but for all members, right? And I think the less you've really done or acted in this way, the harder this will be. And so I hope this is something that we do, right? Because one thing that I really saw working with the SS is that most, like probably 11 out of 10 times, that things worked out differently than I intended, right? And that's something that I think everyone knows. Like when you do something in reality, it's very different from your thoughts, right? But a lot of times when that happens, our initial reaction may be to get disappointed, right? But then something that I learned is that when we entrust to God, it will turn out differently, but it often turns out better than we expect, right? So don't necessarily hold on like so strongly to the idea that you had, because sometimes the timing won't be right. And like how fully fleshed could your idea really be, right? Like, the very first lesson we teach is sun stop, right? It's about like Joshua thought the solution was for the sun to stop, and like that's what he knew. But God did answer the question, but he answered in a different way. Like there's a reason why this is such an early lesson, such an important point, right? And even last week, someone even like touched on the principle of miniaturization and magnification. And so this lesson is something that we have to apply to everything, right? Miniaturizing and magnifying and applying it appropriately across our life and across our missions and various different things. And so yeah, with this in mind, yeah, we really can't get disappointed. We may be asking for the sun to stop, and God will answer it in a different way, in a more ideal way, in a way that when God looks at the entire situation, he'd be like, okay, like the sun stopping thing doesn't really make sense. But in winning in the essence of time, that is something that I can do, right? And God, will respond to it, and He will use that prayer to answer it in the best way. Right, so I really hope that no one goes through this thing of being discouraged, of looking at it very in a negative light, because what we ask for, all of those things will be fulfilled if we ask for sincerely. And so with that, we'll go into our first break for today. And so this last night, I guess not last night for you guys, but on Sunday night, in American Providence, we wrapped up our 21-day prayer condition for the second generation together with the Blessed Family and the JS members. And it was incredible, right? I think we recorded like 1,400 minutes altogether. And that really went to show the power of parents, right? Like how much they're willing to pray for the kids and for these kids and the future of Providence. And so the song that we sang during that time was Path of Love. Shout out to Rachel for picking it out. People kept memeing me. Like I was like, I think it's becoming a running joke, right? So people were like, do you want to sing Natural Temple? And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I mean, I wouldn't mind, but people kept memeing me about that. Because because I constantly use Natural Temple on the MSD, and so we'll offer Path of Love today, and it's a great song, so I hope you guys enjoy.
Since I have come, you've come as well, and today we become one with God, one with the Spirit. We unite on this path of love. We must walk now and for all eternity. This path will never change. Hear the word flows without end. Proudly we go on, always for Providence. Now and always hope will shine brighter than the sun. This eternal love and hope forever shines bright. Finally, this love of ours fulfilled God's will at last. The Lord our God's promises will not fail, they will stand without change, now and this love of ours fulfill God's will at last. The Lord our God's promises will not fail, they will stand without change, now and for all eternity. Since I have come, you've come as well, and today we become one with God, one with the Spirit. We unite on this path of love. We must walk now and for all
Yes, awesome. I hope that you all enjoyed that. And so continuing off, the previous question, and also going off of, the fact that we're on this path of love, right? When we're walking forward, right? The first thing that we were touching on was that, history is moving forward, right? It's November of 2024, and many things have happened, right? And so I think even Pastor Sky, he posed a question last week on the poll about how we feel about the end of the year, right? Like, are we ready, right? And so I think it's like, it may always be like sort of an apprehensive question, right? Like, yeah, we feel somewhat ready and we feel okay, right? And, I think most of the time, when it's like a big question like that, right? Like, are we generally ready? Then the question is like, maybe, right? And so, we've recognized that there's probably more that we can do and more that we maybe should have done. But if it's more specific, right? Like, do you feel ready for this upcoming test, right? Or for this upcoming thing, right? Tomorrow at work or tomorrow for your mission, then you might have a more clear answer of yes or no. And so, I hope that, people really are thinking about those things. And so kind of connecting it to the previous question and the illustration, right, with the lecturing thing, right? There's many things in Providence that we need to do, right, for each of us specifically. And that we want to do, that we want to see in Providence, that we're like, God, this would be so great, right? Or you may see a pain point, or you may see an opportunity, right? And so, of course, we have to look at it from multiple lenses. And that's what God said too, right? Like, you have to look at things positively, right? And that's the way that you can go about doing it, right? And so you can look at things, I feel like a lot of times people can look at things critically, right? And I definitely tend to do that a lot, right? I think it may be a natural part of how human tendencies may be if we don't fix that part, right? If we don't actively, make attempts to, think more positively, right? Choose looking at things as the void of something as an opportunity rather than a limitation, right? Rather than an imperfection, right? And be like, how come things are like this? Versus like, oh, wow, this is something that we can do, right? And it's hard to do that, right? Like when Sunseim looked at Warmingdong, his hometown, he didn't view it as a place of opportunity, right? He didn't think that it was going to be a great place. And that makes perfect sense, right? Like when we look at the situation, we're like, what the hell is this, right? Like what is this? Like, how can we, do anything here? Right? And so I feel like each of us have that dirt, like field, right? And we're like wondering what to do with this thing, right? But just like with the example of Warmingdong, and even like with God's history, right? Like God said that too, right? Like even in the previous week's message too, about what the Garden of Eden was like, right? People kind of expect, right, like the Garden of Eden, like this Mesopotamia region, to be like this fertile, like this great place. But he said no, it was like a barren wasteland, and it was something that they needed to work on in order to make it better. But that they didn't do that, right? Because Adam and Eve didn't grow up to, build on it, right? They didn't do the work that Jesus did, and that's something has been doing in this time period. So for each of us, the point stands that we have to do something. Like, we have to make it happen, and I don't want to forget even the previous point of, like, we have to do it according to God's will in order to be satisfied, in order for us to be satisfied, right? Because I think sometimes we bring out the complaint and then it ends there, right? So we have to do something. And so it's, the main point of this segment is asking the question, okay, what is it for each of you guys that you really want to see done, right? And you can look at it on the broadest level, or we can choose to kind of like narrow it down more, right? Like, so you can choose to look at it as the end of the year, right? By the end of the year, what do you want to get done, right? Or like if you feel like there's realistically no chance of finishing it by the end of the year, like what's something that we can do now to plan for that thing for this upcoming year? And maybe you feel like the idea that comes to your mind is a long-term project, right? It's not something to be finished within the upcoming year or within the upcoming 2 years, right? Maybe it takes like a 3 to 5 or even 10-year process. But whatever it is, right? I'm very curious to know, like, what is it that you feel like you can do for Providence? And it may not be like something that you personally feel like doing, right? Or feel like you're capable of doing, but what is it that you want for Providence? Like, what do you want to see? And that's something that we've seen, that we've talked about many times. But the first starting point is to really think about this and to pray about this. And I feel like maybe there's many ideas that people have that they may even be keeping to themselves, right? Or we're not bringing it into conversation in a way that people will be responsive to it, because that happens many times too. Right? This is a conversation I was having with other members and leaders. I was like, a lot of times leaders are adverse to change, right, that members bring up. And, it's not entirely the fault of the leaders, right? It's because sometimes we pitch it in a way that would be very challenging for the leader to accept, right? And like they see us, right, like with all of the flaws in our plans coming up to them, and then they're like, what the heck is this person talking about? How do I like manage this thing? Like, how do I make sure it doesn't grow out of control? Because if we just apply it according to our thinking, then it will lead to problems, right? That's what a lot of the people who left Providence and are causing problems did, right? They do things in their own way, right? So we always have to do things together with the Lord, but of course we do have to bring it up. And so it's not forgetting the previous thing of making sure to pray and check. But also because of that, like sometimes we may have had negative experiences and not want to bring up the thing, right, that's important, right, and not want to bring it up. And so I want to bring it up in this conversation to really field this question, to feel like what it is that people want to do and what is it that they want to see happen, right? And so whether you feel like you should be really involved with it, or that you just want to see it overall, or you want to work together with other people to make it happen, right? Like I wanted to ask this question, like what that thing is, right? Like whether you've been thinking about it for a long time, or because of this line of questioning, you're reminded by the Holy Spirit about it, or like it just a new idea comes to mind, right? After listening to this, like either of those. And also know that, yes, if it's something that, is really sincerely asked for, right? Like in Matthew 7, then it will come to happen. But it may not happen in the way that, even if you write it down in the comment below, in that specific way. But, still leave a comment anyways, right? And more than leaving a comment, of course, pray about it afterwards. And let's even work together, right? In praying for each other's ideas of things, the sincere things that we want for Providence. Let's really pray for those things, right? Like, and maybe we don't agree, 100% with what the idea is, right? Maybe we don't want one lecturer to teach like the life from start to finish. Maybe we don't want, on the flip side, a bunch of lecturers to evangelize one life, right? But we still want, at the core, the thing about the life learning well, coming to realize and pass and joining us in this history, right? That's something that whatever you think the method is, you want the end goal in that regard, right? So for each of us too, you may have this great, or what you think is a great idea, like with respect to praise or to tech or to like evangelism or to like something at your church, right? But maybe other people have a different idea, and that's completely fine, right? Because through our conversation, through checking and taking action together, we are finding out what God's will is. And we're working together as members of the body, right? We're different body parts and we are not the head. And I think that's something to be emphasized again, right? Because when we get so consumed by an idea, I think all of us have this tendency to like act as the head in a certain sense, right? And that just makes sense, right? Like we're the ones like controlling like what it is that we're doing. But if we forget the fact that God is the head, then we won't even get what we wanted in the first place, right? And I don't know if you've seen that. And yeah, if you feel like sharing an example of that, right, like where like you strongly push for something and didn't pan out, then feel free to share that too, because I think those things are insightful. And maybe you have a completely different takeaway. Maybe you feel like people weren't there for you in that moment when you were doing it, because I felt that too. But ultimately, I don't think that people are out to get us. Necessarily, and it's not just the fault of something, right? There's a more ideal way to do it, right? If there weren't a more ideal way, then the ambition masterpiece would have been built in one try, right? If it, even like and imagine the heart, right? And that this might be the heart that you have after seeing the thing that you were trying to build up not work out, right? Like, oh my gosh, like we put in this work, we thought it was perfect, and because of XYZ it didn't work out. Right. And so I think that's exactly the heart that people had at first. Right. When they finished building it, they're like, oh, my gosh, like, compared to what we had before, this is so much better. We can meet here. We can pray here. We can sing here. We can dance here. And then when the rain came and it fell, right, how disillusioned people must have been. Right. Because they thought that was the perfect thing. Right. And when you look at the people who left after the first time it collapsed, or the second or the third or the fourth or even the fifth, they really felt that what they thought was God's will didn't come to pass. And they didn't think that Providence was a place with God's will. Ultimately, like, why else would you leave? Right? Because it would be because we're holding on to what we believe is God's will, right? When it wasn't actually, right? So, please don't lose heart, but let's do things in a positive way. Like, bring up these ideas and talk about it. It may not happen right away, but at least you're sowing the seeds to these things, and then we have to take substantive action. So as a last bit for Bible today, and with these two questions and fielding like what's out there, right? For what kind of different things that you have in mind, the last thing that I will say is that we really do have to take substantive action to make these things happen. Because another thing, and I think we've all been victim to this, and we've all done this, right? Like, if you say something, right, and you get it off your chest, or you say it, right? But then if it was something you truly wanted, then we have to do something about it, rather than just saying it, just getting it out there. That might have been a critical first step, but we then have to take steps towards that thing. And so I'll give a concrete example, right? So because Sunsim has asked us to reteach the second generation, and this wasn't just SS, but second gen overall, we're thinking about the best way to do that. And in the past, because our purview with the SS department are these like middle school and high school kids, we're like, okay, the most that we can probably do is a program from like a 3-month program, right? But and like sometimes our idea is that we want to expose the kids to the word and expose them to something, and expose them to like these different things that they should know. And so rather than this idea of completion, of learning everything, it goes to this idea of kind of getting their feet wet. And those two things may not exactly be the same thing, right? And where God's will is in between these things, right? Like, because something like he wants us, of course, in a wise way to get them to completion. But not just listening for the sake of listening, but for the sake of understanding, right? And of knowing completely. Right? And so maybe this exposure thing is like part of it. But like in the past, what we've seen with the with SS is that we've run like quite a lot of programs in the past. And so the programs are typically like 3 months or so. And then after that, like there's a work of like, what's next? Right? And so we only did one part. And so if we were doing this exposure thing, and let's say we only do the first 10, 11, 12 lessons, then when are they going to learn the other 18? Right? Is the question. And sometimes that work doesn't happen. Right? So that's why I'm a little hesitant to have just one program, because then I know we're going to have to come back and try to do the subsequent program. And that may not happen right away. Right? And if you didn't do it right away, if you didn't do it at the right time, then like the time may not come back again, right? And that's something I've seen working with the SS. So the thing I wanted to say to each person is, right, yeah, like saying it, confessing it, saying that you feel like this is a thing to work on is one thing, but we do have to work on it together. And do not be disappointed if initially it doesn't, if you don't have the answer, but sincerely pray. This is something that I saw, because with anything, whether it was SS or second gen, or like with the local churches or the regions I was working with, whether it was an AP or when I was in Korea or a different country, this is something that I really saw. That like at first I don't know, but when we sincerely ask and pray, and when we work together with our brothers and sisters in a wise way, things that we had no idea about come to mind. Right? Things that the Holy Spirit inspires. And then when it finally comes to pass and we actually take action on those things always turn out better, right? And I think people have seen it with various different events and various different things, right? Even in American Providence, right, with the soccer tournament, those who attend and those who planned it, they're always ecstatic at the end, because it always turns out better than they expect. And so that's something to note, right? So it will produce fruit that's better than we expect. But we have to have the right expectations in the beginning. Do not lose heart. And like at the end, when we see the final product, we also have to recognize what God did and what God has done, and see how it's better and how it actually resolved the thing that we wanted to. So let's really be hopeful. Let's really do this together. Please leave a comment below about what kind of ideas that you had, or as Rachel mentioned, you can email the 2G Talks email, or you can just shoot us a DM, right, about any of these kinds of things. And so with that, I'll wrap up Bible Today for today, and we will have our break, and then we'll get into 2G Talks with Rachel from Houston.
today. Like a river runs to the sea, and like the wind blowing strongly, I'm running and soaring. My heart flies like the wind. It runs like a river, should never fade or change. Love should last. True love is forever. Welcome back, everyone, to 2G Talks. If you haven't already, please feel free to leave a like and comment. And I think I mentioned this last week too. I have received access to the 2G Talks email. So if you prefer to shoot me an email there, either to share your story that you have of Sunsanim or any other commentary, please feel free. Anyways, I hope that everyone is having a wonderful Tuesday and start to your week. Can y'all believe that it's already the first Tuesday of November? So I counted. Including this week, we only have about 9 Tuesdays left of 2024. Oh my goodness. Has everyone accomplished your New Year's resolutions that you created? Or did you even make any this year? I don't know. I had a few, but I see it as we have this kind of last stretch of 2024. And especially after hearing the Sunday message, it's really now the time to put in the work and run with our lives on the line. And so again, in talking about the Sunday message, the title for it was Your Faith. And actually, there's a specific part of the message that I wanted to briefly touch on before going into our main portion of 2G Talks for today. I remember specifically there was this one sentence that really spoke to me, in which Sunsanim had said, "You must do far more than you are doing now. If you only do average work, then you will barely even do or be average. Practice your own faith. It is your responsibility." And my immediate thought was, yes, amen. Absolutely, Sunsanim, I need to do more work and I want to do more things at a greater level. But then I had another thought. And this thought was kind of a smaller, more whisper-like, incessant, annoying kind of thought that maybe you've had before, which was why. Why do we have to do this again? Why do I have to work even more when I've been doing so much? Why does this all have to be so difficult? And I don't know if you've experienced this throughout your life of faith before in Providence as just a general member, but I definitely do think that as a second gen, and of course I don't want to generalize too much, but I think second gen may have had this experience more of receiving extreme anxiety or receiving anxiety while listening to the message. Now, I do think, again, that this stems from being really young in Providence and not having the ability to discern the words that Sunsanim was telling us, right? Growing up in Providence, and just in general, the messages are always talking about how we have to constantly change, repent, you have to become perfect. And especially for me and my generation, and even those younger than I, when we were growing up, it was the time of making yourself before the rapture. Because remember, that was around 2015. And so at the time, the messages were super intense. They were always talking about how you have to repent. There's judgment coming. There's going to be the end times. You have to be clean. You have to be perfect, pure, no opposite sex problems, no media. So growing up in that environment, it was super intense and really strict. And I recall myself, looking back on it now, a lot of the times when I would listen to the message, I didn't receive strength from it. But instead, I would listen to the message and just get this huge wave of anxiety and just feeling completely overwhelmed. It really did feel as if I couldn't keep up with the message, like I couldn't keep up with God's pace. And because I felt that way, it made me feel as if I wasn't worthy of being in Providence. And I remember being so frustrated at myself for feeling this way. And I felt like even though I was supposed to be encouraged and receive strength from the message, I got frustrated because during the message, I thought, oh, God, don't you see all the work that I'm trying to do? Can't you see how difficult it is for me? And I do believe that a lot of second gen, or possibly even yourself and other members, may have felt this way from time to time. I mean, imagine being told your whole life, kind of, in the nicest way possible, that you're not good enough, that you have to keep making yourself, right? That's kind of the underlying connotation that we have, that you have to keep changing. And if you view it from the worldly perspective, you can, if you don't prune this thought or fix this thought, it can create a subconsciousness that's insecure and a subconsciousness that's constantly doubting yourself and feeling anxious. Because, again, from that worldly perspective, you've been told your whole life that you're not good enough. And of course, like I'm saying, I know that this is not ever, has ever been, is, or will ever be Sons of Nim's prerogative. You know, that's my disclaimer. I know Sons of Nim never, ever, ever meant for us to feel this way. And he never says that we're not worthy of love. And he never meant to make us anxious when hearing the words. But I do think it's important, and I want to bring up, and that is why I'm so grateful that I actually have this second gen platform to not just remind myself, but to remind other members, other second gen who may be listening now, or even in the future, that it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to feel anxious and sometimes overwhelmed when you're listening to the messages. And that there is a process of working through those emotions. And through that, you get to realize about yourself. And again, this ties into the Sunday message that we heard this week. Learning what it is your own responsibility in regards to your faith is. And more importantly, I always go back to this, having to truly know Sons of Nim, what he's talking about, who he's talking to, and where his heart is when he says certain things in the messages. Think about it. Sons of Nim is at the highest level of perfection. He is at such a high level that no one on this earth can truly understand him. So not only is he dealing with the weight of the world, but then he also has to take imperfect people and make them perfect. Right? He has to make people that have the original sin perfect. He has to take people that have generational sin, personal sin. And for a second gen, while growing up in the church, I remember always being instructed, every single word that Sons of Nim says in the message, every single phrase that he's speaking, you have to take it as if it's directly pointed to you, which is a good mentality to have. And when you're a kid, you do just that. You do as you're told, and you really do take every single thing that Sons of Nim says to heart. But sometimes that can be to your own detriment. I remember this one instance growing up when my little brother, he struggled so much because at the time the messages were about evangelizing. And he was maybe 5 or 6. And I remember how much he cried and cried and cried because he was so sorry, sad, and just frustrated, overwhelmed, anxious. Because even though the messages were telling him to evangelize, he couldn't evangelize. Which makes perfect sense because he was 5, right? And this is where that ability to discern what Sons of Nim is saying comes in. And this is actually the moment that my mother came in and educated us and told us that we have to realize and know who Sansanim is talking to, right? Know his 심정. This is where I learned what 심정 meant. Because we have to learn and know what's in Sansanim's heart. But of course, as a second gen, it's not always easy to remember that. Instead, it's really easy to, instead of dealing with all those emotions, turbulent emotions, anxiety, overwhelmingness, it's really easy to blame someone else. It's really easy to push Sansanim and push God away, to push the word away. But of course, in the end, for myself, if you listen to my past second gen talks, I have talked about my personal coming to faith story and how I too try to push away God. But in the end, I realized, really, I'm always wrong and God is always right. And just because Sansanim tells us that we have to continuously make ourselves change, work harder, do more, doesn't mean that we aren't already working hard. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't see that. And it doesn't mean that he isn't proud of us. He's absolutely proud of us. And he absolutely sees all the hard work and determination that we've put in. I mean, people that come to Providence, that come to this history, are by no means average. We are all people chosen by God, whether brought to this faith or born into this faith. And so all Sansanim is doing, he's adding more pressure, more intense heat to turn people who are like diamonds and make us into even more perfect diamonds that don't even have a single speck of dust. And like I said, I did want to bring this up because I do remember that feeling of anxiety that I had growing up based off of my own mentality and kind of worldly mentality. And sometimes it still does come back from time to time. But whenever I truly do stop listening to the word according to my own mentality, and when I just really listen, and I listen to it according to God's heart, I can see God's love shining in every single word and every single message. And so, before I wrap up and conclude 2G Talks, I have a poem that I wanted to share, because Sansan said that we should write poems and make proverbs and stuff. So I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you all, especially to the second gen, because I truly do believe, without a doubt, in the future, there are going to be times that the word makes us struggle, makes us anxious. And there are going to be times when you hear the word and you'll be convicted. But I've come to realize that when we're convicted about something, usually that means that it's something that you need to work on. Because again, whether you view it as fortunately or unfortunately, we are always wrong and God is always right. So, I'll go ahead and share my poem and then maybe give a little bit of a kind of explanation of my poem. Or you can also just take it as it is, But my poem that I wrote it quite a while ago. I want to say last year. And I titled it Sunrise. So I'll go ahead and read. Providence is like swallowing the sun. The more I try, the more I feel my flesh burning from the inside out. My heart races. I can't stand the scorching heat. I pull away and spit out the sun. Immediately my lungs fill with fresh air. My pounding heart calms. But when the wind blows, I'm so cold and so alone. Where is my love? Where is my hope? So I turn back and swallow the sun. But it burns. It burns all of my senses completely, and I am overwhelmed. I look up into the sky for an answer, a reason. Surely God will not let me die. And so I let go. The sun rips through my flesh, sets my veins ablaze. I am incinerated. I am ash. I call out to God in my belittled state. I hear his steps. He approaches my dust. From the ashes he pulls me, for I am now transformed. What a blessing it is to shine like the sun. So that's my poem. Again, you can take the poem as it is. I don't like to always share fully what it means, but I did write this poem gaining or gathering the inspiration from the times when I felt anxiety while in Providence. And how even though that may be the case at times, once you can work through those feelings and rely on God, then you can really come to know His heart and actually be changed through that anxiety to become something better, to become someone better. And I know that today, as it being Tuesday, this is Sensitim's trial today. I can only imagine the anxiety that Sensitim is going through right now in his heart. And not for himself specifically, but I know he always worries so much for all of us. And so I wanted to share my poem to signify how we can all become people who can really change and transform ourselves, working really hard to raise our level, and especially to pray for our beloved Sensitim so that he doesn't feel like he has to face the world alone. So, I really do hope and pray that we can be together with our beloved Holy Trinity and Lord. And with that, I'll wrap up 2G Talks. I hope you all enjoyed my poem and my topic for today and were able to relate to it. So with that, I'll finish for today, and I hope I'll see y'all next week.
It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and feel your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone, you know. I'm on the Morning Star Drive, you know. I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone, you know. I'm on the Morning Star Drive, you know.